Apologize for that. So I hope everyone slept well and dreamed some good dreams of the environmental review process last night. I bet a lot of you were thinking about if you never hear the words town of Possumville again, it'll be entirely too soon. And I'm really glad to see people came back and I didn't scare anybody off. So I wanted to give everyone a chance to ask any questions that you may have had from yesterday's material. Some of you may have went home and had some spirited discussions about the difference between categorically excluded subject to projects and categorically excluded not subject to projects. You might have some questions about project aggregation or description. So if you have any questions, put them in the chat box and I can answer them. All right, it looks like no one had any questions from yesterday. So let's go ahead and get started with the most common level of review, and that is the environmental assessment level of review, or EA. So this is by and far the most common level of review that we see. And projects that will involve not only new construction, but involve the significant expansion or upgrade and improvements of existing facilities will be considered environmental assessment projects. And projects where the cultural environment will be disturbed are also considered environmental assessment projects. One of the biggest rules of thumb that we have that I'm sure everybody has heard of is that if you turn dirt, an environmental review is needed. And I stand by that being the quickest way to determine if your level of determination is an environmental assessment level. But some of you may be asking for categorically excluded subject to projects that don't convert to exempt, dirt can still be turned for replacement of existing structures. And to that I say, the new rule of thumb is if you turn any new dirt, an environmental assessment is needed. So for CEST projects and EA projects, you're not confused. So that means if the land has not been previously disturbed and you start disturbing it, an environmental assessment will be needed. So with advice from the Great Management Manual, and that is to always complete an environmental assessment level of review rather than to think, well, maybe this project is categorically excluded. As we all know, it is far, far better to do more work than it is to do less work. You'd hate to do all the work for a project and you think it's categorically excluded subject to, and it turns out your CDS reviews it and says, actually, you need to do an environmental assessment level of review. And like I've stressed before, were any problems to arise environmentally, since the responsible entity and the certifying officer are the ones that are legally on the hook, you definitely want to exercise more due diligence than you do less due diligence. So if you're like me and about 99% of the rest of the world's population, you may have a tendency to procrastinate. And with the golden age of streaming upon us, Netflix has made it even more difficult to stop procrastinating. I've been watching a lot of shows lately, so I've been doing a lot of procrastinating. But the one time you don't want to procrastinate is when you start to complete a project requiring an environmental assessment, and they require significantly more time to complete than the projects of lower levels of review. If you remember yesterday, we could have filled out the exempt categorically excluded not subject to form in about an hour, but environmental assessment projects require the publication and posting of the combined notice, plus the comment periods, plus the state comment period. And this is truly where all the time comes in: consultation with regulatory agencies and determination if mitigation is needed. So remember, start early because we cannot get under contract with DHCD until the environmental review record is all the way complete. So how do we complete the environmental assessment environmental review record? So in Appendix 2A, page 223, you would complete Appendix 2A, Parts 1 and 2 in the entire environmental review record format. Then you would determine if the project is in the floodplains or the wetlands. I've added this in here because we do tend to see quite a bit of our environmental assessment levels of projects that need to complete the 8-step decision-making process, which would be found at Appendix 2.8. After you've completed the entirety of Appendix 2A, Parts 1 and 2, which include both the statutory checklist we looked at yesterday, the statutory checklist worksheet, and the environmental assessment determinations and compliance findings for HUD-assisted projects form in Part 2 of Appendix 2A, you will have determined that all of, and hopefully, because if you haven't done it, you haven't done your environmental review record correctly, that your project is or is not in a floodplain or wetland. If it is, you'll complete Appendix 2H, which is an 8-step decision-making process. And while you're completing Step 1 of this, you'll be concurrently completing Step 2, which is a consultation with regulatory agencies and the documentation and compiling of all your information. And remember, in completing your source documentation, don't just make up the documentation. The documentation has to be credible, verifiable, and relevant. If you want to prove, for example, that your project is not in a floodplain or wetland, you wouldn't just cite a Wikipedia page on the locality. You would use the FEMA map and the NEPA Assist tool and show where your project is in reference to the floodplain. So after you've gathered all your documentation, you would move on to Step 4 if you're not in a floodplain. But if your project is in a floodplain or a wetland, you would publish Appendix 2D, which is the early notice, and then enter into the 15-day comment period. Then you would publish Appendix 2E, the final notice, and enter into the 7-day comment period. And then you can move on to Step 4. So Step 4, if you've already completed your floodplain 8-step decision-making process and all of that, you would publish or post the combined FONSI and notice of intent to request a release of funds, which is Appendix 2M. Oops. You would disseminate that during the comment period. You would wait 15 days of publishing or 18 days of posting. You would email your request of release of funds to DHCD, and you would place all of that information in the environmental review record. And remember that you need to disseminate your combined notice to the Region 3 EPA office, DHCD, and any appropriate tribal, state, and federal agencies. So if DHR wants a copy of your combined notice, you would send it to them. I know that that is quite a few steps compared to the projects we did yesterday. And looking at it, you're like, man, this is definitely time consuming. So like I said, that's why it's best to go ahead and start early. If you're even thinking of applying for a CDBG project, go ahead and complete everything up until Step 4 in your pre-application phase if you can, so that you don't have to wait as long to get under contract during the pre-contract phase. Okay, so before we move on to talking about the broad level tiered and environmental impact statement levels of review, let's go ahead and do a quick pop quiz, knowledge check, quizzy-poo, whatever you want to call it. So if you turn previously undisturbed dirt, a blank level of review is needed, and you can put your answers in the chat box. EA, that is absolutely correct. So what level of review is most common in DHCD projects? That would be the environmental assessment again, because they are used mainly for new construction. Now, what do you do if you're unsure if a project is categorically excluded, subject to, and does not convert to exempt, or if a project is an environmental assessment level of review? Well, Jimmy had a really good answer, and it was to ask me, but let's say I'm on vacation or I've won the lottery and I don't work here anymore. You would do what Christy Street said, and you complete an environmental assessment. All right, true or false? You have to publish or post a combined notice and submit a request of release of funds and certification for EA level review of projects. That is true. All right, so any questions for environmental assessment level of review projects? All right. right, no questions. We're awful quiet today. I think the Possumville talk really got you. You all, you're like, I don't want to bother her. She seems insane. Let's not ask her any questions. All right. So these are some of the more uncommon levels of review, which are the broad level tiered reviews and environmental impact statements. So a broad level tiered review is roughly a variation of the categorically excluded subject to level of review. Underneath 40 CFR 1052:20, a broad level tiered review is used to eliminate repetitive discussions of the same issues and to focus on the actual issues that are ripe for decision at each level of environmental review. So if we translate this sentence from legalese to something a little less jargony, this essentially means that a project has several of the same levels of clearance for one part of the project, such as the entirety of the project is not in a floodplain, but several buildings would require a DHR consultation. Therefore, tiering would allow you to knock out the bigger broad level things, in this case, this example, the floodplains, before moving on to the nuanced environmental issues that would be specific to each individual environmental issue. So we mainly see this level of review in downtown projects where facades are to be rehabbed in a historic district, or for the rehab, substantial reconstruction of multiple single-family homes within a neighborhood that could or could not be historic. So underneath Tier 1 of a broad level tiered review, all applicable laws and authorities must be addressed that are required, and then a plan is established for future Tier 2 reviews. The Tier 1 review addresses impacts that would reasonably occur on most sites in the project area and how an impact may vary within the project area. Going back to our downtown project example, you may say that the historic district of Possumville is all within the floodplain, but 3 buildings are contributing structures and will require further DHR consultation. So then you move on to Tier 2, which a site-specific review will be completed for each site identified in Tier 1. Using Possumville again, the 3 buildings that were deemed to be contributing historic structures will then undergo a site-specific review for each building. And tiering allows environmental analysis for each Tier 2 project to be conducted closer in time to actual construction phase or as funds become available for construction. And notice that no public notice or request of release of funds and certification are required unless unanticipated impacts are determined or impacts involving the specific site were not adequately reviewed in the Tier 1 review. So how do you complete a broad level tiered review? In Appendix 2 of the manual on page 7, we have instructions for how to actually complete a broad level tiered review. The first step would be to complete Part 1 of the environmental review record and the statutory checklist, which is Appendix 2A. Then you could complete the broad level tiered environmental review, Appendix 2Q, and include it in the environmental review record, and then you would email that document to your CDS and upload it into CAMS. So I'm going to click so that we can see what it looks like. So bear with me. Technology has not been on my side today. All right. So if you see this, it looks a lot like our categorically excluded subject to form that we had from yesterday. And most everything is still the same, other than we have additional location information. So you would want to do a site-specific review for each of the historic houses, and they're located at 391 Blevin Street, 215 Morrison Avenue, and 111 Crescent Street. And then you would complete everything the exact same way. And you would make your determination at the bottom, which is extraordinary circumstances exist, and this project may result in significant environmental impact. And this project requires the preparation of an environmental assessment, or there are no extraordinary circumstances which would require completion of an environmental assessment, and this project may remain categorically excluded subject to. So once again, going back to our Possumville situation where the houses are going to be rehabbed and you have to consult DHR, that would convert to a determination of an environmental assessment, and you would complete that in addition to this form. So let me stop sharing and go back to the presentation. All right. So these projects are mainly for historic districts and downtown facade projects. And for downtown projects specifically, which are the ones we see most often, here's what the process would look like. And it would roughly go as follows. You would consult DHR. You would sign a programmatic agreement if DHR requires it. You would complete your statutory checklist and consult with regulatory agencies as necessary. You would do a variation of the combined notices, and you would issue your request of release of funds and certification. Then as the project, moves forward, you get your first group of houses or buildings in order, send your renderings, your workups, your final designs to DHR. DHR would make a determination for each group that you submit, and then DHR would either approve or deny it. Once they approve it, you can put those out to bid, and then you would repeat these last few steps as many times as needed. And I'm going to show you what the variation of the combined notices looks like. All right, I think you can see that. So this is specifically only for tiered reviews. And this is from the HUD Exchange website. And essentially, you would fill it out. And it would state that Tier 2 site-specific reviews will be completed for those laws and authorities not addressed in the Tier 1 broad level review for each address under this program. So once again, those 3 buildings in Possumville, you would put them right here. Do your public comments. And then your certifying officer would sign it. So like I said, we don't see this project, this level of review, mainly for downtown projects. It's not as common as an environmental assessment. Okay, so moving on to environmental impact statement. First of all, let me just say, let's hope we don't have projects involving environmental impact statements, because these are projects that are definitely known to have a significant impact on the human environment. So any projects require an environmental impact statement that are construction of hospitals and nursing homes with more than 2,500 beds, the removal, demolition, conversion, or substantial rehabilitation of 2,500 or more housing units, projects that would provide the site for 2,500 or more housing units, projects that would provide enough additional water or sewer capacity to support 2,500 or more additional housing units, and a project with noise-sensitive issues is located in the unacceptable noise range. So a hospital or someplace where you have to be quiet if that's in an unacceptable noise range. And all those project types would require an environmental impact statement. So as you saw in the previous slide, DHED doesn't typically fund large-scale projects like these or any other large projects like major roadways or highways or airports that would require an environmental impact statement. However, projects can require an environmental impact statement, not only if they can significantly alter the human environment, but also the cultural environment. So usually when we were dealing with endangered species, or if we are excavating and we happen upon, woolly mammoth bones, a project could require an environmental impact statement. So all that being said, if you think or even have the slightest inkling that your project could require an environmental impact statement, immediately contact your CDS, and then we will have to contact HUD's Field Environmental Officer, which is Carrie Johnson in the state of Virginia. So the environmental review for EIS projects can sometimes take up to 2 years to complete. So please, please, please notify me, your CDS, DHCD, whoever, ASAP. Like I said, environmental impact statement projects have the tendency to keep me up at night with worry. So for the sake of my sanity and my mental health, please just try and have projects that don't require environmental impact statements. All right, do we have any questions about that section? All right, y'all are quiet today. It's raining. People are probably tired. It's Thursday. So we're going to move into the most time-consuming part of the environmental review record process, and that is conducting review. The conducting of review starts with the statutory checklist and the attached worksheet. This is your map to consultation. And I'm going to click on it right here in case you've never seen it before. And these are all the related acts at 58.5 that you have to consult with and document in your environmental review record. Okay, this is a statutory checklist. As you can see, we have all of these things on the left side that we have to consult and look for and document when doing our environmental review record. But also, if you scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll notice that there's a worksheet for preparing the 24 CFR 58.5, aka the statutory checklist. So I would highly recommend you using the worksheet to complete your your statutory checklist. So let me stop sharing this right quick. All right, so the first item on the statutory checklist that I want to pay especially close attention to is number 1, and that is the Section 106 review underneath 36 CFR 800. Section 106, which is formally called the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966, requires consultation with the State Historic Preservation Office, also known as the SHPO. And for Virginia, that's the Department of Historic Resources, also known as DHR. And this is one of the sections that I see most often that will trip grantees up. And the best and first resource that I point people to is to actually, like I said, follow the worksheet attached to the statutory checklist in Appendix 2A. If you answer those questions, it'll literally tell you step by step if the project requires consultation. And I'm going to show you that in the next slide. Another resource to use is Appendix 2I in the Grant Management Manual, which has a list of DHR excluded activities and the benchmark for review from DHR. And DHR's own electronic database is VCRIS, which stands for Virginia Cultural Resources Information System. And that has all the information about all the state's historic and cultural resources. Just to let you know, you do have to sign up for access for VCRIS, but certified local governments have free access. And I'm going to click on these activities very quickly. I'm going to show you what VCRIS looks like. All right. So this is Appendix 2I, which is DHR's list of excluded activities. So I'm not going to read this all out to you. We can all read it. But something I want to bring to your attention is that these are the projects that DHR said, we don't want to have anything to do with these. And they involve the replacement of existing water and sewer line, in which a review's already been done, construction and replacement of newer existing water sewer systems in VDOT's right-of-way, community development activities, and so on and so forth. So this is really good to see, hey, is my project even, do I even need to consult DHR for this?
Kelly?
Yes.
Marion noted in the chat that as a local government, they're charged $800 per year for VCRIS.
Well, DHR's website says differently, so we might have to talk to somebody at DHR. Let me actually pull up VCRIS, which I was going to do anyway. You just pay that amount to renew. We pay as well. Are you signing up for VCRIS underneath your localities or as a PDC? Usually. Or a consulting agency. Okay, a locality. So let me show you VCRIS. VCRIS says, okay, that certified local government will have some sort of complimentary AHAE access. So I might do some more research to find out why you all have to pay that much money for VCRIS. So I will send that after the presentation and figure out what's going on with that. Yeah, I'll check that out for you. CV PDC has not paid anything in the past. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I know that you have to have the license section to complete section 106 review, but like I said, I'll check that out and figure it out for us. Well, ignore what I said about it being free, and we'll move on to the next slide. So I know this is hard to see, but this is the historic properties section of the statutory checklist worksheet in Appendix 2A. And if you can see, if you answer the questions, the first one being, does this project include the type of activity that would have the potential to affect historic properties, such as acquisition, demo, disposition, ground disturbance, new construction, or rehab? And that would be most of our projects. So therefore, that would trigger consultation with DHR. So if your project does trigger consultation with DHR, which, like I said, most of our projects that are not exempt, categorically excluded, not subject to, you can use Appendix 2J, page 74 as a template letter. But just make sure to change the contact information in our template. It still shows Laura Lavernia, and Chelsea Jeffries is now the DHR representative. And you'll need to make sure to document that letter and email to DHR and any information from DHR in the source documentation column, along with their compliance finding and if the project is in compliance or not. And once again, make sure that it is easy to find source documentation and provide a place for people to find it in your environmental review record. And remember, anybody should be able to pick it up off the street and find information. And if a programmatic agreement is required with DHR, you will get that signed before you publish or post your combined notice, and you will disseminate a copy to DHR. All right. So within the section 106 review, in the worksheet section of the statutory checklist, the section for historic preservation of Native American tribes must be followed as well. So once again, as you can see, any projects that include the activities including ground disturbance and new construction in undeveloped areas, which are a lot of our projects, requires consultation with Native American tribes. When consultation is required, utilize HUD's TDAT, which stands for Tribal Directory Assistance Tool, to see if any Native American tribes that have interest in the geographic location of the project want to consult. And this is just a little aside. Some Native American tribes may have headquarters not where your project is located. For example, the Delaware Nation has its headquarters in Oklahoma, but go ahead and send the invitation to consult regardless. A tribal nation's ancestral grounds may be wherever your project could be located. So if that throws you off, go ahead and send the invitation to consult anyway. You would then use Appendix 2J, pages 75 through 77 for your sample letter. But remember, you have to do government-to-government communication. So when these letters are prepared, they must be on the locality's letterhead. A PDC, a consultant, a grant manager, anybody can prepare these letters, but they cannot put it on the PDC's letterhead. It has to be the locality's letterhead because it is government-to-government communication. And if a tribal government does not respond within 30 days, they do not wish to consult, and you would document that in your environmental review record. Okay, so I know this is terribly hard to see. Oh, wonderful. Hey, thank you for finding that, Matt. If anybody can tell, Matt just put in the chat from our previous conversation about VCRIS that DHR said in a recent email they have adjusted their policy to allow for planning district commissions to have complimentary VCRIS access, so they would waive the fee regardless of your license level. That is great news. Thank you for sharing that, Matt. All right, so this looks much bigger on my computer, I know, than it looks for you, but for research for other parts of the statutory checklist, are they offering refunds? I don't know. Is Chelsea Jeffries on here? We might ask her.
I am here. Hello.
Hey, Chelsea. I hate to call you out on the spot, but we're having questions about VCRIS. Is that true that they're going to start waiving fees for PDCs and whatnot?
I haven't heard anything specifically, but I did hear that they were changing some policies related to the archive search that's required as part of 106, in terms of the access to VCRIS. I'm gonna put the contact information for the person who could answer those questions into the chat once I find it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And like I said, I hate to put you on the spot, but I figured if you were here, I'd go ahead and ask.
Yeah, no problem. I'll put it in the chat for everyone.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, so moving on, for research for other parts of the statutory checklist, you'll utilize Appendix 2C for the state agencies. You need to contact if you're prompted by the statutory checklist worksheet. So I don't know. I can pull up Appendix 2C, but this shows who you need to contact for every question that you have on the statutory checklist. So if you saw it was numbers 1 through 17, and this is every agency that you would need to contact if you're concerned about, hey, my project, there's going to be soil erosion and it's going to go into the river. Do I need to do something about that? And then you would have your state agency that you need to contact right there. I want to show you something else too about when you're completing your statutory checklist. If you get stumped and you want to know how HUD may handle an issue with some of the related acts at 58.5, I want to show you this website. Give me 1 second. All right. If everybody can see this, this is HUD exchanges related federal laws and authorities. So these are all the topics that you have on the statutory checklist. So for example, let's pick, does anybody want to pick one of these for me to click on?
Floodplain.
Oh, somebody said floodplain. We'll do noise and then we'll do floodplain. So I'm going to click on floodplain management and it'll tell you what you have to do if your project is in a floodplain. So for this, for example, if your project is in a 100-year floodplain, you'll have to do the 8-step decision-making process. And the 500-year floodplain, they have areas of less than 0.2% chance of flood occurrence, but those only require critical actions if it's a hospital, a nursing home, a police station, something involving public safety to comply with Part 55. So you determine whether the project site will contain a floodplain, determine if you need to use the 8-step process, complete the 8-step process, and identify any mitigation requirements. And then this is your compliance and documentation that you would have in your environmental review record. So you would need to have one of the following. So documentation supporting the determination that an exception at 55.12C applies, a FEMA map showing the project is not located in a special flood area, a FEMA map showing the project is located in a special flood area, and the 8-step process is or is not required. And then documentation of the 8-step process if you need that and your required notices. And there's a worksheet there with how you would do that, and then a partner worksheet. So this is such a very handy tool, and I'm going to pull up noise for Christy. Noise abatement and control. So once again, this shows what the acceptable levels of noise are, so not to exceed 65 decibels, what normally unacceptable is, and what unacceptable is. And for compliance, you have to document that the proposed action is not within 1,000 feet of a major roadway, 3,000 feet of a railroad, or 15 miles within an airfield. If the project is within those distances, you would show that the noise level is either acceptable or that you could do an effective noise barrier. If the noise is normally unacceptable, you would identify noise at mitigation requirements that would bring the interior noise level down to 45 day and night levels. So, like I said, HUD Exchange, if you have any questions, HUD Exchange is very, very handy for these kind of things. Site contamination. Okay, let me pull up site contamination right quick. Here, actually, I'm going to just put this in the chat as well. I didn't even think about that. If y'all want to follow along at home. So this once again gives you the compliance and documentation for what you would need for site contamination. So you would need either evidence that the site is not contaminated, evidence supporting a determination the hazard will not affect the health and safety of the occupants, or documentation that the site has been cleaned up according to EPA or state standards. And then there are your worksheets and your related resources. And I'm going to go ahead and put this in the chat as well. So that is for all of the HUD Exchange related federal laws and authorities. Okay, so some key points that I want to point out when we conduct research. And that is that other than the 30 days that are given to Native American tribes, when reaching out to an agency for consultation, it takes as long as it takes, essentially. So if you need to consult with DEQ and you've not heard back with them from 2 months, you don't just get to ignore that if you have to consult with them. You have to reach out to them, give them a nudge, call them, email them, drive to the office, but you'll have to do whatever it takes to wait until they send you some information back, because you can't just decide, I don't need to put that in the environmental review. That's not important to me. You have to have it, and it has to be documented in your environmental review record if required. Also, everybody that has ever done an environmental review probably knows this, but Virginia does not have any designated wild and scenic rivers. So that's something, a very easy one to check off your statutory checklist when you're doing that. Statutory checklists cannot have blank sections or not applicable. This is the biggest red flag, because if I see that, I'll say, well, it doesn't look like they did all their research. What were they doing? So I'll look through it very, very carefully. And remember also that documentation should be easy to find within the environmental review record. So once again, here is a bad example of a statutory checklist. And notice how there is no explanation as to why the box is checked for airport hazards. They just say, no, it's in compliance. In your statutory checklist, you want to add information that lets the reviewer know where this evidence is found for your determination. So a good example would be that the statutory checklist says no, where there is no mitigation measures necessary for this, and the project is not near an airport. See Appendix 5 for map determination showing this. There's a clear definition as to why airport hazards do not pertain to this project, along with the supporting documentation and where to find that at. So any questions before we take a quick break and then move on to the publications and posting section? All right. It looks like we don't have any questions. If we want to take a break from 1:45 to 2 o'clock, or if we don't want to take a 15-minute break, if we want to just do maybe a 5 or 10-minute break, would everybody be